Hi, and welcome to Advancement Tech. Give me a moment while I make sure the stream is set up and working well. So we are doing this live on YouTube, and I do have chat enabled, so I'll be looking down here periodically to see if anyone's chatting, and I will respond to it as we're doing the presentation. Okay. So I'll wait to make sure that the stream is working, and we'll get started in just a few short seconds here. Okay, things are looking good. Welcome to Advancement Tech. This is episode 12, hard disk drive versus solid state drive. And really we're going to talk a lot about the different technologies that are available for storage for laptops and computers right now. So if you're in the market for one, there's a lot of different terminology being thrown about, and we're going to kind of go over some of that. Okay, so welcome. Thank you for attending. I'm going to go over a little bit of a background about myself, have about 15 to 20 minutes of educational content, and then a Q&A period where you can ask me questions, and I will do my best to answer them. All right, so in terms of background, who am I? My name is Creston Jameson. I've worked at 2 different universities over the past 12 years, or not the past 12 years, over a course of 12 years. I oversaw development services or advancement services. Since then, I founded a company and developed a product called Advancement Form that offers online giving and event registration. Okay, so we're going to kind of talk about, again, the different storage technologies that you may be looking for in a laptop or a computer. So the one that's been around the longest, of course, is the hard disk drive. Now they call it a hard disk drive because there used to be disks that were actually floppy disks, and it was a magnetic ring. So, but these are hard disks that are in your computer, and the disks are essentially hard. And that magnetic storage media is what most computers have been using for many years up until recently, in the course of a number of years or so, maybe 5 to 10 years. Second most recent addition is the solid state drive, and these are what you would call SSDs. Basically, the memory that is used in your computer to keep track of things as it's actively working on things, a non-volatile way. And when you power off the machine, that memory, the storage you have in memory goes away. But a solid state drive actually has memory that retains that information. So essentially it uses a type of memory to retain that information, and it has some benefits for doing that. The next type of storage technology you may hear about is embeddable multimedia card. So these are multimedia cards that you may have used in your camera or phone, or perhaps even a video camera. So they're multimedia cards. However, they're embedded onto, say, within the laptop or the computer. And there's some advantages and disadvantages with that we'll look into. And some other terms you may hear of is SATA or NVMe or PCIe or M2. And we're going to talk through some of these here just so that you can just be aware of the different storage technologies definitions. Okay, so starting with a hard disk drive, I just grabbed a definition from Wikipedia, and it says a hard disk drive, otherwise known as a hard disk, a hard drive, or a fixed disk, is an electromechanical data storage device that uses magnetic storage to store and retrieve digital information using one or more rigid, rapidly rotating disks. So it's or platters coated with magnetic material. So basically, it's a physical reading of the disk that's done. And if we look at the image here, so this image is from Wikipedia, and this is the internals of a hard disk drive. You have these rigid platters, again, that are magnetic, and this head moves back and forth across as they're spinning, reading and writing information, changing the magnetic information or detecting what the magnetic is. So that's basically what a hard disk drive is. Now, a solid state drive is a solid state storage device that uses integrated circuit assemblies as memory to store data persistently. So the memory that you would normally use your computer, again, when you turn the computer off, everything in it goes away. However, this is a special type of memory used in an SSD that will be retained even though the power goes off. Now, this is sometimes called a solid-state device or a solid-state disk, although SSDs do not have physical disks. So again, there's no disks in them, but the terminology just kind of stayed because they are a replacement for hard disk drives. So there's no disks in them, it's just memory. So if we look at an image, there's just computer chips that are on these drives. There's no real disks. Okay, so let's talk about first the hard disk drive. So typically they come in 3.5 inch or 2.5 inch sizes. The first one's more for general computers, the smaller one's for mobile devices, typically. Now, most of these use a SATA or a serial ATA interface. Now, I'm not going to go into that, but if you hear that terminology, that's kind of like the physical interface you would plug the cable in if you ever went in the computer and needed to replace a hard drive. But sometimes when you're looking at a computer or a laptop, it may say it's a SATA type drive. Now, in general, this is the slowest form of storage. So the memory solution, solid state drives, are a faster form of storage. So retrieving data, writing data is slower than SSDs. Now, these drives, because they're physically spinning disks, are designed to run at different speeds. So a laptop may have it at 5,400 revolutions per minute. Some desktops, you can get higher speed ones that are 7,200 RPMs, and some ones that are used for servers go even higher. Now, with that speed, you get a little bit of a higher transfer rate. But a downside to that is that it also creates more noise. So that's the other thing about hard disk drive, is that they are typically audible, whereas an SSD is silent. So there is a noise present with a hard disk drive. Now, the biggest benefit of a hard disk drive is that generally you can find the largest capacity for the lowest amount of money. So it's the best capacity to price ratio you can find. Now, that may not be the case in the future, but right now that's pretty much what it is. Okay, so let's compare this to solid state drives or SSDs. Oops, this should be an SSD. So again, doing a live edit. Okay, so typically these are 2.5 inch sizes or the newer M.2 form. So you may see this term M.2, and it's really a form factor or a size. So if we look back at the image, this is the like the 3.5 inch, and this is designed to be a replacement that you could just put right in to replace a hard disk drive. But they also come like these two are form factors that are called M2. So they're smaller integrated circuits. So again, this is something that could be beneficial for laptops, but also computers are also starting to use these as well. Now, these can use a SATA interface, which again is like a hard disk drive, a serial ATA interface, or a PCI Express or PCIe interface. So again, looking back at the picture, these are the form factor, and I believe these are using the PCIe interfaces usually, and whereas these are the SATA, and I believe this is an M-SATA. And again, this image is from searchstorage.techtarget.com that I found that discusses M2 SSDs. So again, these are the M2 form factors. I believe they're using the PCIe interface, and this is the SATA interface. Again, SATA is usually designed for a drop-in replacement for hard disk drives, and the PCI Express is what you're seeing on some of the newest SSDs that are available. Now, the benefit of SSDs is that they are the fastest form of storage available, so they're much faster than hard disk drives. And a PCIe SSD can also use a newer transfer protocol. So again, this is a term you'll see as NVMe, which is even 2 to 7 times faster than for example, a SATA SSD. So an NVMe SSD can be 2 to 7 times faster than a SATA SSD. Again, due to the new transfer protocol and generally these use the PCI Express interface. And we're going to go over some review here about what's fast, what's slow, and what are the benefits. But for all SSDs, they're pretty much silent. There's no moving parts in them, unlike a hard disk drive. Now, at a given price point, capacities are smaller than hard disk drives. So even though they have generally a size benefit, a weight benefit, they are lighter, they're silent, again fast, the disadvantage is you can't get in as high capacity as hard disk drives, particularly at a specific price point. So again, where the hard disk drives are more beneficial is in the pricing for how much you can store on them. Okay, so now there are also hybrid drives. So they attempt to combine both an SSD and hard disk drive technologies because they want to get the storage capacity of a hard disk drive, but kind of try to get the speed of the SSD. Now they do this by trying to cache or store frequently used files in the SSD portion and just use the hard disk drives for less frequently accessed information. So this could be something you want to explore to try and get the benefits of both. All right, the next kind of storage technology you'll see, and these are generally on less expensive computers or laptops. So it's called an embedded multimedia card. That's what eMMC stands for. And again, like I mentioned, these are, again, this image is from Wikipedia. These are essentially multimedia cards that you may use in your phone or your camera or video camera. And they're usually embedded right within the computer on like the main circuit board for it. So you usually don't see these replaced a lot, or I don't even know if you could replace some of them because they are embedded in the device itself. Now, this is a cheap form of storage. So again, you'll see these on lower priced laptops and potentially computers. Now they are like SSDs in that they are silent. But one disadvantage of them is that they have a very small capacity. Usually if you see something, usually 32 gigabytes to 64 gigabytes, so very minimal in terms of size. Now the performance, they're definitely not as fast as SSDs, and they can be faster, and usually are, from like a 5400 RPM hard disk drive. So you'll see generally performances between an HDD and SSD. Okay, so in terms of other terminology you may see as you're looking around, you may see the term hard drive, which basically means a hard disk drive. You may see, like I've seen some vendors that say it uses a flash drive. Well, basically when you look into it, they're usually meaning the embedded multimedia card. Now, when someone says something has an SSD, you may want to investigate and say, okay, is this a SATA SSD? So what that means is it's kind of like a drop-in replacement for a hard disk drive. And it is fast, much faster than a hard disk drive. But the other question is, or is this SSD a form factor, again, the type of size it is, an M2, that's what the form factor is, and NVMe, again, this is the newest that has a special transfer protocol that is even 2 to 7 times faster than a SATA SSD. So basically, this type of SSD would be the fastest you could buy. This would still be much faster than the hard disk drive, but definitely not as fast as this. So you want to look and determine more at a more granular level what type of SSD that a device is using to see how fast it could potentially be. Now again, you may see reference to M2, which is basically the form factor, what size it is. Now in M2, it could be using SATA or the PCIe. And now if it says NVMe, it's almost 100% that it would be using a PCIe. And again, you may see NVMe, which means a non-volatile memory express, which again is the transfer protocol. And you'll usually see this with an M2 form factor and a PCIe interface. Now, I've also seen some reference to, hey, this laptop has so much storage, and you have to drill in to actually find what kind of technology it's using. Generally, if a laptop says it has 32, 64 gigabytes of memory, that is probably an embedded multimedia card. If it is at 128 or 256 or 512, then it's probably an SSD. Something above that, like a terabyte, generally it's probably a hard disk drive, although depends on the price. A lot of time you can get a terabyte SSD without spending too much more. So at that stage, you, as a size increase, be sure to check out whether it's using a hard disk drive or a SSD. Okay, so here's kind of like a decision matrix to go through and kind of what you may be interested in and prioritizing the different types of technologies. So what if you need a lot of storage? Maybe you have a lot of video files or images. The number one choice for if you need a lot of storage for your files is basically a hard disk drive. That's generally going to give you the most bang for your buck, essentially, and you can generally find really large sizes to store what you need economically. The next down from that is maybe if you want a little bit more speed is consider a hybrid drive. So again, this mixes SSDs and hard disk drive technology to try to give you a little bit more performance, but still give you a relatively large area to store information. Down from that, you would be probably looking for an SSD. They are generally smaller than a hard disk drive and definitely more expensive, but if you want speed, that would be the way to go. Coming down from that, again, is the embedded multimedia card. Again, these tend to be 32 gigabytes, 64 gigabytes, maybe 128 gigabytes. And generally, it's what is embedded in the actual laptop or computer you would use. So that's why that's kind of last. Now, what if you need a lot of speed? Well, if you're looking for speed, the fastest one that's available today is one that has NVMe, so non-volatile memory express SSD. So if you can find an NVMe SSD, now usually this is going to be the M2 form factor, the type of size it is, and using a PCI Express slot. So that's what you would put into the system. So these are the fastest storage technologies available today. Coming down from that is a SATA SSD. So this uses a SATA interface, which is compatible with a lot of different hard drives. So if you're wanting to replace your storage in your existing computer or maybe a laptop, it may not have the port or capability to use these types of SSDs, but generally you can still just swap in a SATA SSD without too much of a problem. Now again, the next fastest, but giving you more storage, is the hybrid drive, followed by generally the embedded multimedia card, and then following up at the end of the pack in terms of speed is the hard disk drive. But again, that is the technology that gives you the most storage. Okay, so now there's one thing is that what if you want speed and storage? Is there something else you can do? Well, what I've done with the computer I have is that I use an SSD. So I actually use two storage solutions. I have an SSD that stores my operating system and programs so that those are start fast and are snappy and make the computer very responsive. But then I use a hard disk drive to store the large data files I have. So like videos I'm producing or images, etc. those are, or any kind of multimedia, those are stored on a separate drive, a hard disk drive. And I have seen vendors that actually sell even computers and even laptops that have this kind of layout where they provide an SSD and a hard disk drive in the system. So this could be an advantage if you're looking for kind of like the best of both worlds. Of course, it means paying for two different storage technologies. But again, these tend to be inexpensive in a lot of capacity, so you can do that and maybe keep your SSD smaller for what you need in terms of your operating system and programs, but storing all your multimedia files on a hard disk drive. All right, so that is the presentation about the different storage technologies, SSDs versus HDDs. So at this time, I'll see if there are any questions in the chat and be ready to answer them. Now, while I wait to see if there are any questions, I'm going to talk about upcoming shows. So still planning on what the show is going to be next week, but that will be next Friday, April 19th at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We'll present another technology show as it relates to nonprofits, fundraising, as well as advancement offices. And if you have a suggestion for a presentation or a technology you'd like to learn more about, please feel free to put it in the comments or leave a note in the chat. Okay, I don't see any questions right now, so we will go ahead and close out the show. So if you're interested in getting access to more of this content, please feel free to go to advtech.tv. So there you can see past episodes of Advancement Tech, as well as sign up to receive notifications of future episodes so that you'll be sure not to miss any. You can also feel free to check us out on YouTube. And if you're watching, well, definitely watching on YouTube, we would appreciate if you could give us a subscribe as well as like this video, because it does help us try to grow our audience. And with that, I will close out and I will see you next Friday.